When you've got questions, he always has an answer. It's Sean Hannity, this afternoon at 2, right before Joe Walsh at 5 on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. And I got to say, this has been an interesting development. I've been reading this gentleman's work over the past several months. Mark Penn, who's a former advisor to President Bill Clinton. He's a campaign strategist for Hillary Clinton back in the day, not, I don't believe, during the 2016 race. But he seems to be one of the few Democrats in the D.C. chattering class that is asking legitimately skeptical questions about the conduct of law enforcement and intelligence agencies throughout this Russian collusion investigation and everything that's tangentially related to it, number one. And number two, recognizing that when you weaponize these agencies for political ends, well, if one administration can do it, then the next one will do it too. And this has the real potential to boomerang on Democrats in addition to undermine the legitimacy of the federal government. Big problems for our representative republic, potentially. So pleased to be joined by the aforesaid strategist, Mark Penn, who has also written a book, Microtrends Squared, the new small forces driving the big disruptions today. Mark, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning. And so, as I mentioned, I've been reading your work, asking questions about, or questions that you think should be put to Bob Mueller, some of the skepticism you've leveled in the direction of the so-called deep state. And so I wonder how you received this New York Times story this week about Operation Crossfire Hurricane, which, among other things, reported that there was at least one FBI government informant in the Trump camp during the campaign, and that the Obama administration, again, this New York Times reporting, used its counterintelligence powers to investigate the Trump campaign during the campaign.
Well, let me just say first that, I spent a year working with President Clinton fighting Ken Starr, and so I felt that process was wrong, and I think this process is wrong. Frankly, this process seems even worse.
Okay.
In what way?
Well, because the process has, when you think about it, has interviewed or drawn in virtually every person who worked on the campaign, virtually every person working in the administration, turned them upside down, caused them to get lawyers. How can anyone participate in a campaign or government, as this idea that, well, boy, if we're looking for Russia collusion, it could be anywhere. And it justified this largest open-ended search that basically rummaged through the government and campaigns. And so I think that this is far worse. At least when we dealt with Monica Lewinsky, they only interviewed a few people, right? And so this has taken on that kind. And this New York Times story, I think, is laughable. I mean, you have former and current members of the FBI and the Justice Department, essentially before this Inspector General's report comes out, leaking their side of the story that their only problem was they weren't tough enough on Trump. It's laughable, really, when you read it. And look at the beginning. I found very interesting in the beginning. They say, well, in the beginning, these FBI agents were very interested in talking to this Australian diplomat about what he had found, and they had to break protocol because the guy was not an intelligence agent to find out about this conversation months ago. Now, what does the Times leave out? How did the FBI get the idea that they should talk to this Australian diplomat?
Right.
Where did it come from? Well, this Australian diplomat signed a $25 million contribution from the Australian government to the Clinton Foundation. He knew them all. The implication is this went to the Clinton Foundation people, to the State Department, to the FBI, and it's humorous that article is written and they leave out the most obvious fact, which is who told them about this guy. So, look, there's so much that's dubious about the opening of this investigation that, yes, I felt quite strongly I had to speak out because anybody could see it.
But on some of the specific other, reported pieces in that Times piece, like the idea that you had an FBI asset in the Trump campaign. Do you just count that? Do you think this is just them, flacking for favored parties within their source community, like you said in advance of the Horowitz report? Or, is this something that's troubling on the order of the state being used for political ends?
Well, we don't know yet. Look, it's pretty clear that the Pfizer warrants were based on some combination of this laughable Papadopoulos conversation and the Steele document that really was never verified. Now, is this a new aspect that at the same, it appears in that story that on the basis of virtually nothing, they basically targeted 4 people, and maybe they use this additional technique. Maybe that's exactly what's being held back from the documents that the Republicans can't get. We don't technically know enough yet to make that conclusion. I think there's clear breadcrumbs here, and I suspect in the next couple of days, we will find out whether this gets added to the pie or not.
You've written about some of the conflicts as well that beset Team Mueller, or at least there should be questions about those conflicts. There was a report earlier in this week, I believe it was in the Hill as well, about a Russian oligarch who had been enlisted by Mueller when he was at FBI to try and do a rescue in Iran of a CIA operative there. Things that are, sort of coming out that would tend to undermine the integrity of whatever is ultimately produced by this special counsel. And I wonder how you see some of these putative conflicts.
Well, look, the conflicts here are so rife. Mueller was a friend of Comey. If the Inspector General's report blows Comey out of the water, then those conflicts will come right to the fore. Rosenstein wrote the memo suggesting that Comey be fired, and he's running the whole thing. None of this makes sense. Then now John Solomon wrote about this, Russian oligarch, and I happen to have a lot of confidence in John Solomon. But I think the overriding fact is if the special counsel thought that the Cohn stuff had an actual connection to Russia, he would never have sent this case to New York. It would have been clearly within his ambit. So he had already checked this out, and after checking this out, put the case, over to the Southern District, which means that this connecting of the dots. So he knows, and they invest, and and that proves it's a Russian connection. Is obviously of no value whatsoever.
One theory. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, one theory on that too was in terms of the political maneuvering of Rosenstein and Mueller. One theory was also, the reason they kicked that over Southern District was in the event that Trump did pull the trigger and fire Rosenstein or fire Mueller, you still had the Southern District of New York with an active case.
Oh, I think definitely. When how is it that he's going back to 2005 stuff on Manafort and he's kicking this case over to the Southern District? I agree that he was spreading the wings of this investigation even further. And most, I think, importantly, is that the actual U.S. attorney that Trump appointed recused himself. So you have this situation where who's actually running this Southern District investigation? Probably Preet Bharara, supporters when from the guy who was fired, because you have this bizarre situation where the Attorney General and even the U.S. Attorney, the appointed people on the line for this, are in fact not making these decisions, and you have a government within the government that seems to be able to run by itself without accountability. It's incredible.
It's like an episode of Billions. It really is. Mm-hmm. And so the implications of this too. I mean, this transcends partisan politics. And am I right in suggesting that one of your concerns with everything happening here is that you have the institutionalization of weaponizing these agencies with huge and sometimes, it seems, unchecked law enforcement power? And so if it's a Republican, they can use the machinery to target Democrats, and Democrats use it to charge Republicans, and both parties work in concert to undermine this representative Republican form of government we have.
I am hugely concerned about this because I think that we should settle our differences through elections. And that if every time we have an election result we don't like, if we try basically to get an investigation on all of his friends, compatriots, himself and his family, that is just not, the American system, and it will degenerate even further. That's why, I have been so clear. I think more Democrats and Republicans should join together to end this thing. This has been now, 1 to 2 years of investigation of something that was never found, in any realistic way, and that it undermines. Look, I know from the inside that if you're the President of the United States and his advisors, this is a factor in your daily life. It distracts you needlessly from running the country. It makes people worried about what they say, requiring them to take notes, not take notes, make decisions a certain way. It is really distorting of our government. It's why it's such a pernicious process. It's why we have the Bill of Rights in the first place.
He is a former advisor to President Bill Clinton, a strategist for Hillary Clinton, the author of the book Microtrends Squared, the new small forces driving the big disruptions today. And you should follow Mark Penn's writings at thehill.com as well on these and related topics. Mark, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer.